Hi everyone, I'm Book Banshee, and a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a text that reads as follows. Dude, you know what you could read for your YouTube? The Shadows Between Us. Even I hated it, and it's fantasy romance, so that takes a lot. My friend absolutely adores fantasy, so for her to dislike a book of that genre, I was expecting just the absolute lowest caliber of writing imaginable. Imagine my surprise then when I read Trisha Levenseller's The Shadows Between Us and actually enjoyed it. A Christmas miracle, truly. I think this is the first romantasy book that I've ever actually enjoyed. And when there's a book in my favorite genre that I don't like, or in my least favorite genre that I like, I want to really examine it and try to figure out what worked and what didn't. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing about it, and as I'll talk about later, I think that was actually a big factor in my enjoyment of the book. The Shadows Between Us starts with our main character, Alessandra, murdering her first love. Okay, actually, technically, it starts off with an epigraph, which is a quote from the Vampire Diaries, specifically a quote from, I think his name is Damon, never seen the show, from season 1, episode 4, where he says, "It's cool not growing old. I like being the eternal stud." I gotta tell you, that did not make me super hopeful for the book. I thought the dialogue was going to be insufferable and corny as hell, and I thought the main character was going to be kind of an edgelord, and I just didn't have very high hopes. However, hope started to return to me when we were properly introduced to Alessandra. She is the second daughter of a nobleman in what I think is like a late 19th, early 20th century European-inspired setting. Of course, it's fantasy, so it's a little hard to tell, but that would be my best guess. Regardless, she doesn't have a ton of opportunities as a woman and as a second child, but she is very ambitious. We know right from the get-go that she wants to attain as much power as possible, and to do so, she has devised a plan to catch the eye of the young Shadow King. She wants to marry him, kill him, and then rule his empire in his place. In the first scene of the book, Alessandra is talking to a man that she has just bedded, and the man is trying to propose to her, but she is having none of it. He is not smart, wealthy, or powerful enough for her, and she thinks that she can do better. He does not take her rejection very well and threatens to tell everyone of Alessandra's promiscuity, and in response, she tells him that she only sleeps with men that she has dirt on and can blackmail into keeping quiet, including this dude. It's not the most original character introduction I've ever seen, but I think it's really well executed and does a good job of introducing us to all of Alessandra's essential character traits. We know that she's cunning, we know that she has a very clear goal and ambitions, and we also know that she is a very physical person. She is a person who enjoys sex and doesn't feel like she should feel ashamed for liking it. And something I really appreciated about The Shadows Between Us is that the characters are very consistent. I so often complain that a female character is introduced as this sexually liberated badass, but she immediately loses all of that as soon as the male character shows the slightest bit of interest in her. This, however, was not the case for Alessandra, and it was very refreshing to watch her maintain her wit, ambition, and sexuality even as her goals changed and developed over the course of the book. Alessandra attends a ball that the king is throwing, and she manages to catch his eye, mostly by ignoring him, and at the ball we learn a little bit more about the king. We learn that he has shadow powers that essentially allow him to become incorporeal, keeping him from experiencing pain and physical injury, and also giving him immortality. We also learn that no one else is allowed to touch him, and that his parents were somewhat recently murdered, which left him to ascend to the throne at just 19 years of age. And when I tell you guys, I had an absolute Kamala Harris moment when I learned that he was 19 and Alessandra was 18.
We did it, Joe.
I was on a run and I was listening to the audiobook of this, and when I heard that, I was literally thinking, we did it, Joe. We finally have a book where the male love interest isn't 400 and his female love interest is freshly 18. Do I still wish that they were both a little bit older? Yes, but that's kind of a personal preference. I know this is YA, and I also know that the author is trying to stay somewhat consistent with the time period, so it makes sense that Alessandra would be a young woman looking to marry. The Shadow King, whose real name is Callias, invites Alessandra to be part of his court, and after observing her and how she interacts with the rest of the nobility, he eventually introduces Alessandra to a plan of his own, which is basically that he needs to court someone to get his advisors off of his back, and he thinks that she would be the perfect candidate. Alessandra has been playing hard to get this whole time, and although it worked to catch his eye, he doesn't think that she's actually interested in him. He just thinks that she's interested in the money and the power, which is totally true. But obviously, this is a romance, and eventually they're going to fall in love and move beyond this fake dating into actually being interested in each other. So they agree to this plan, but the whole time Alessandra is scheming how she can lock down a marriage proposal from Callias and then kill him and take all of his power for herself. So the real turning point of the book for me, where I started to actually give it a chance despite some of my biases, was when we started to get to know Callias a little better. Callias has a big, adorable dog named Demodocus who literally runs into Alessandra in the palace gardens pretty early on in the book. And in the ensuing conversation between Callias and Alessandra, Callias says, "It's been a long time since I had a friend who didn't walk on all fours." And I thought that was quite a good line, because I assume he's not only talking about his dog, but that walking on all fours can also be a metaphor for how everyone in his life pedestalizes him, grovels before him, and ultimately just kind of treats him like a god as opposed to a human being. There's a real loneliness to this character, and you can tell that he's really just a teenager who wants friends and misses his parents. But I love the fact that he's not some brooding buzzkill because of that. He's very polite, he's very funny, he's respectful, and much like Alessandra, his characterization was just a really pleasant surprise for me. He's not a total pushover. In fact, he kills someone for peeping on Alessandra while she was naked, as he should. But for the most part, I just thought he was really sweet. A real gentleman. I also put a lot of emphasis on this channel on not only the believability of the female characters in the books I read, but also on the male characters. Because I find that in a lot of fantasy and romance, the male leads, they just do not feel like fully realized humans. It's a good thing that romance and fantasy, which both have very high percentage of women in the audience, it's a good thing that they set a very high standard for men and how men should treat women. But having a high standard doesn't mean that I only want to read about perfect men. There's a scene where Alessandra and Callias are talking about his powers, and Callias says that he can use his shadows to see and hear through walls, and Alessandra jokingly asks if he's ever used his ability to spy on women. From my conditioning, reading these kinds of books, I expected Callias to be like completely taken aback. No, I would absolutely never conceive of doing such a thing. I am far too morally upstanding for that thought to even cross my mind, that kind of thing. And to my surprise, he said that he did once when he was much younger, and his mother chewed him out for it so much that he's never even really thought about doing it again. And I really liked that. It's a very humanizing detail about him. He made a mistake, he learned from it, and he became a better person because of it. It also shows that he really respected his mother, which is an important detail for him because Callias is a pretty forward-thinking guy. Alessandra and Callias both have some much welcomed feminist ideas in this book. Callias, for example, he has women on his advisory council, and notably, he doesn't care about the fact that Alessandra has slept with other men before him. So I really like the fact that Tricia Levenseller establishes this really good relationship between Callias and his mom, because it kind of grounds his perspective on women and makes it feel more authentic. Speaking of authenticity, I want to take a moment to applaud the relationship dynamic between Alessandra and Callias. Even I, someone who just really is not super interested in reading about romance, I love these two together because they really felt like friends before they became romantic partners. It is revealed to us, I think, around chapter 15, that if Callias touches someone skin to skin, he loses the ability to control his shadows when they're around him, which would make him vulnerable to pain and death anytime they were near. This is why he pushes away all of his friends and resigns himself to a very lonely and intimacy-less existence. So for most of the book, Callias and Alessandra aren't physical with each other at all, and any form of intimacy is off the table. And as a result, they grow closer in a lot of other ways. Of course, this is a romance book, so desire is still explored. Sometimes they touch each other through clothes. Sometimes Alessandra describes the fantasies she has about Callias. But overall, they develop a very strong emotional and intellectual bond before the idea of physical intimacy is even explored. When talking to my friend about this, I describe them as being like in cahoots with one another. They just feel like real partners in crime. I can just see them running around, getting into some good old-fashioned mischief and just like giggling with each other about getting away with it. There's a scene where someone in Callias's court writes Alessandra a love letter, and Callias is very amused by the corniness of the letter. So he's kind of running around the room reading it out loud, and Alessandra's like running behind him trying to catch him to get him to stop reading it, and he's like turning into shadows so that she can't catch him. I just love the fact that he uses his abilities in such a juvenile way. It's such a wholesome and funny interaction between the two of them. Now, this book was not perfect. There was a third act twist that I could have done without. It actually made me like Callias a little bit less, which was a bummer. And I think my biggest complaint is just that Callias's angst and vulnerability wasn't explored quite as much as I would have hoped. I feel like in trying to make sure he was still sexy and dominant when he needed to be, the author kind of undermined certain aspects of the character that she had built up. But overall, I really liked this book. The side characters were good, the sex-positive messaging was good, the lead characters and their romance was good. So I was really surprised when I saw a lot of people and prominent YouTubers that I follow disliking it. I hadn't read anything about the book prior to starting it. When I read non-horror fiction, I almost always listen to the audiobooks. I barely even know what the cover of a book looks like if I'm listening to it on an audiobook. So I went into this completely blind. And once I finally finished the book, I looked on Goodreads and I start to see that people's biggest complaint is that the book wasn't what they were expecting. People thought they would be getting more spice, they thought the main characters would be more wicked, and it seems that a lot of this stemmed from the fact that this book was marketed as a Slytherin romance. And that started to make sense for me. I thought, okay, if the author is trying to go for some dark Slytherin kind of anti-hero romance, that's why Alessandra is a murderess, even though that doesn't seem like a huge part of her character. That's why Callias stabs someone, even if he really does not seem like a violent man. The media that I would have compared this book to is not Harry Potter, but like a darker version of Bridgerton. It's about nobility, the world building is a little ambiguous, all of the subplots are about different romantic couples in one way or another, and overall the stakes are pretty low. Like there's the threat of Callias getting murdered by an assassin, but we're pretty damn sure it's not gonna happen in a book like this. It did not read to me at all like a Slytherin romance, whatever that's supposed to look like. Perhaps I misread the book in some way, but it actually felt quite light and fluffy and wholesome to me. It's unclear to me if it's the author herself who called the book a Slytherin romance or if it's just online book communities, but either way I think it's very interesting because on one hand I'm sure this comparison garnered a lot of hype and sales for the book, but at the same time, if that was the promise that was the reason people were buying the book in the first place, I can see why they would be a little bit disappointed. All in all, it just validates me to keep encouraging the community to stop boiling media down to just tropes and comparison to other franchises, because this book is a whole lot more than just a Slytherin romance, and I hope that it is recognized as such. So in conclusion, this book was recommended to me as a joke, but I have to say I was very impressed with Tricia Levenseller. I appreciate how this book understood its own limits. I saw many complaints that the world building was not fleshed out enough, but I would counter by saying, why should she waste our time with complex world building when the focus of the book is just on two characters and their relationship? She focused on writing interesting characters instead of world building, and I think that the book was better off for it. There will be a sequel to this book in 2024 called The Darkness Within Us, and it follows Alessandra's older sister, which sounds really interesting to me because her sister, Chrysantha, was depicted in this book as a frivolous airhead. But from the synopsis of the sequel, it seems like she was just playing into this role in order to catch the attention of some wealthy older man. Chrysantha in the first book was presented as kind of a foil to Alessandra. So Alessandra was very prideful and she was unapologetically sexual and intelligent, whereas it seems like Chrysantha might have been playing into stereotypes to get the approval and the power of the men around her. So I'm really interested to see if the sequel is going to explore those conflicting ideologies and how they affect the girls and their relationship and how the world views them. Thank you for listening to me talk about this extremely unexpected gem, and thank you to my lovely best friend for recommending it to me. I'm gonna take a break from the popular internet books for a while. I have some nonfiction and classics lined up because I want to keep the noggin sharp, make sure I'm challenging it every now and again. But if you guys see a popular book that you want me to read and review, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm open to pretty much all genres and I like to mix it up, so leave me a recommendation. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoy the upcoming holiday season. Bye. Also, before I go, I gotta show off this dress that I found at a thrift store because Alessandra likes fashion and I feel like she would want me to show off the detailing. Okay, that's it for real, bye.